Leaders and learners. My name is Tanya McKenzie, and you can find me at the intersection of public relations and leadership. Join us as we talk to organizational leaders, elected officials, experts, authors, artists, and personalities, sharing their stories, talking about how they got to where they are and how they continue to learn and lead the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. Greetings, good people. Welcome to another edition of Leaders and Learners, where we all know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. What I love about today's guest is he's done so much. His knowledge is so vast that everybody can get something from it. But I am going to focus in a little bit on, especially since we are headed into the end of the year and people, especially business people, are trying to figure out, how they should be moving into the new year. Should they pivot? How are they, growing their business, and what should they be doing next? I got a guy that knows some things. He's had a couple businesses that he's sold, and people are only buying things that are worth something. So he knows how to build business, pivot them, make them profitable, withstand disaster, which is very important in the cancel culture. We are going to talk to today Mr. Patrick Esposito, and he has a new book that is sharing so much of this knowledge. So today, guys, tune in, ask your questions, ask your follow-ups, but let's welcome Patrick. Hi, how are you?
Hey, Tanya, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
I'm so glad to have you here. Like I said, we're in the fourth quarter. We're getting to that end of the year. People are starting to panic about what they should be doing about their business. Should they start something new? What does that look like? There are people that are looking at their New Year's resolution to start that business that they, have always envisioned. So I'm thrilled to have you here. I want you to get started by letting us know, with all of the things that you have done, and we'll get into it, what made you want to write a book?
Right. Well, the book, and it's actually funny. Some folks have asked me, well, when did you have time to write a book? Right. Or folks ask me the other question, which is, why does it seem like everybody writes a book? Well, the answer to both is, working for, I guess now 22 years, helping, to start, grow, and either sustain or lead to acquisition small and medium-sized businesses. It struck me that there were certain key principles that I thought existed, based upon the anecdotal evidence I had, that of what helped small and medium-sized businesses to stay on a path, right, of good revenues, good profitability, and what caused some of them to flounder or fail. And what I ended up doing, and I guess the early pandemic era, right, led us all to have a different type of work style and relationship with work, right? We spent all this time on Zooms and video calls. We did not have to spend as much time on planes or in airports. So ended up doing a survey to see if some of the theories I had on what were the key foundational elements that helped small and medium-sized businesses to succeed were actually things that were shared by other folks who had founded and led successful small businesses. And it turned out the great news was the anecdotal evidence matched the survey research. And there were really 8, key categories of decisions that if you look at them, right, as you said, probably at least annually, you can end up with a lot better foundation to sustain and grow your business.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Tanya. I was waiting for you to dive back in. Sorry.
Well,
here's
my question for you. When you started talking about COVID in that COVID area, what was the biggest shift that you saw other than just the work from home? Like, what else did you see dynamic about business culture other than the work from home piece? Like, what was missing? What did you notice with all of your vast experience was like, this is the key to success with business?
Yeah. And and to your point, so it's interesting. So when you look at that era, right, many of us were not well prepared, right, for a world where we were not face to face with clients, where we were not face to face with our team members. The business at that point that I was with a co-founder leading, we worked on a very distributed basis. We did travel a bit to get to client sites. So that was very different. But we had a plan and a way, right, where we made use of a lot of online collaboration tools, a lot of video, tools like Zoom and otherwise, Teams, to do collaborative work with folks who were geographically distributed. So without really trying to be ready for something where the world shuts down, we were ready for when the world shut down. And so, to your point, being prepared and ready to respond to disasters is one of those, 8 foundational categories of decisions that's really important to look at and approach. And so, while we were not necessarily ready for COVID, we were ready for distributed work. And we had to do some work to kind of figure out how to manage client relationships in that no travel era or limited travel era. But we figured that out. We managed through it. And when you look at organizations, right, the 8 most important things to focus on for businesses that are small and medium size to sustain themselves or to grow to be ready for an acquisition, it's having a good governance team to help the owners and leaders make rational decisions, having a good management team so that you're not carrying too much of the load, right, as founders, having a method to look at pivots and adjustments that need to be made in the business. Everybody has great visions, right, of what they want to do with their business when they start it. But most of the time, the theory you start with changes as you go, and you've had to make some adjustments or maybe even pivot. I certainly lived through that in a couple of my ventures, and listening for those signals, right, and being able to get plans ready to follow, right, revenue opportunities and customer opportunities, critically important. The same way that building the infrastructure to support growth is important, right? If you're somebody who's started a small business, right, you're a leader of this small business, you're probably very concerned because you've had some lean times about not overspending, right? So there's a hesitancy at times to invest in the infrastructure to support growth. Sometimes that's technologies, sometimes that's people. And then the last 4 areas, having the right frameworks for managing the relationships among the business owners, something we often ignore at the beginning when we start a business. We get some very brief, bylaws or some very short LLC operating agreement. Doesn't cover how we manage if we're disagreeing on where we go, things you can do to solve that problem pretty easily. The same way with not having an organized way to look at mergers, acquisitions, and other types of business transactions, even partnerships. If you don't have a way to look at them, you might take the first one that comes along, may or may not be the best idea. And then, circling back, the 2 things nobody likes to talk about, right? Getting prepared for disasters and succession planning. And, preparing for disasters, we don't want to think about bad things happening, right? And succession planning, we sometimes don't want to think about bad things happening to us, or a world where our business that for many of us as founders, maybe, the organizational organizational element of our person. We don't like to talk about those things. We don't like to think about those things, but those are essential to make sure a business can succeed with or without you. So
you talk about a lot of different elements of business, except for my favorite 2, marketing and PR. Where do these fall in line for you,
right,
for a successful business?
So marketing and PR, and if you're okay, I'll lump communications into that as well.
Please.
So one of the aspects, right, that we look at is there's these 8 categories that seem to make or break businesses. There's a framework to assess, right, what are the problems, opportunities, and solutions, right, that we can propose to make sure those 8 things are in alignment. And then there's a decision-making process. Some organizations have their own criteria. We have 2 simple stage gates we often recommend if they don't. When you get into planning and implementation, right, that is where marketing, communications, and PR are so incredibly important. And I would actually argue there's an aspect, right, even when you start looking at and having conversations with your management team and with your governance team around how we're going to approach change, right, where communications is incredibly important inside of your business. Because if you don't have everybody aligned around the fact that we need to look at changes periodically and that change is okay, you can end up with problems. And if you don't, right, let's say you get through the assessment, you get through the decisions, you prioritize the 1, 2, or 3 things that are most important to, make some changes on, right? Recruiting a management team member to run HR and human capital, right? Or something like that. Making a decision to, add a formal board of directors with outsiders, right? If you don't develop the messaging, both internally and externally, about changes that are being made to your business, changes are not going to be well received. And generally, that's not going to positively impact your team retention or your customer retention. And when you look at the adjustments and pivots that I've seen, adjustments and pivots can sometimes mean moving away from a certain client profile or moving away from a certain product offering. And if you're not clear to customers, right, clients you have, on how you're going to maintain and serve those relationships and what the opportunity is as you're moving your business forward, you can end up with a lot of loss of clients, right? The same way you're going to lose teammates if you don't communicate effectively. So
So we're
marketing and
talking
public
about we're talking
relations is
about
important.
brand right now, right? Like your
Yep.
business brand and then your personal brand. Do you actually keep yours separate? Is your business brand separate from your personal brand?
So, generally speaking, I've always launched businesses with co-founders, right? So, in each of those businesses that I've launched historically, there's usually been the business that has its own, you know, profile, and it's a collective, right, of both the founders, the leaders who come in, and the team. With my latest business, Initiative Labs, which basically was launched to help put the framework from the structure of success in place in small and medium sized businesses. That has been, sort of, at least to date, you know a solo show. So, this is a new journey for me, right? Which is, there is a new business that is more me than it is we.
Yes.
And hopefully over time, I'd like to think that business becomes more we than me, right? Because, obviously, most people cannot do it alone, whatever it is, right, that you're trying to do. The book, The Company of One, I enjoyed it a lot, right? It's a great theory, but at the end of the day, anyone, really not super scalable. And when I look at a business of one, it can definitely be a way to minimize some types of stress, right? Like you don't have a lot of other folks you need to help make sure are aligned with where the business is going, or that you need to have candid conversations with, where I may not be performing, they may not be performing, etc. But there's so much risk, right? And everything on your shoulders. There's folks who do it well, and that's a perfect way for them to manage being them. For me, I probably am more comfortable in a we, right? And so me is right for some, we is right for others. I'm probably more of a we person. So, it definitely is an interesting journey, though, figuring out which you are, right? And most of my work has been about organizations that are small but more than one. But there's tremendous resources out there on how to manage the company of one, right? With that that book name, and others, because it can be a great way to work.
How do you scale a business of one, though? So, for solopreneurs that really want to expand their business and expand their brand, how do you suggest they go about doing that? Because in their minds, they have this great vision.
Mhm.
Most of the time, that falls flat. That's why businesses go out of business.
Right.
For solopreneurs or maybe very small companies, how do you suggest they scale?
Yeah. So I mean, look, I think the first thing that I would normally ask someone who is a solopreneur is, why do you want to scale? Right? Because I think for a lot of folks who have worked by themselves, right? And I've worked with folks who, are either management consultants, attorneys, accountants. I will ask them, one, are you sure you want to do this? Right. And then I'll ask them, um, you know, what is your plan, right, to scale? Do you want to make sure that that you add more clients before you hire? Because that's obviously going to change the way that you're working today, right? Because before you find that person to plug into doing work, um, you're going to need to spend more time selling and probably more time delivering, which is probably going to increase the amount of hours you're working, which is great. A lot of people are like, that's what I want. I don't want this to be high risk. Others will say, look, I want to hire somebody who is like me, but a younger version of me, right? Who I can train to basically help me do the work I'm doing today, grow the work, and I'm willing to sacrifice some of my income and some of my sales and delivery time to get that person trained as they may need to and get up to speed. Other folks who want to move from a solo to a we environment, they'll say, look, I've been talking to a number of folks who are like me and are doing work that are similar to what I'm doing. I'm thinking about merging, what I'm doing with what they're doing. And I've seen that a lot, right, in the marketing, communications, and public relations area. Especially, you'll find folks who are very talented, very gifted, doing things as a solo artist. And they say, look, I could probably end up with less risk, more customers, um, better quality of life, and frankly, maybe more interesting work projects if I collaborated with folks who had different skills that they did well. Right. So, somebody might be particularly gifted on the marketing side. Somebody might be better on the PR side. How do I bring, people who have the best talents together, all under one roof? So there's a lot of paths you can travel, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what that person, right, is looking for. Are they looking, are they really looking to grow? What's the timeline they want to follow to grow? And then is the pathway to growth them hiring or them bonding together with others?
Let me ask you this. I'm going to circle back to the communications, marketing, and PR
Yep.
portion of this. When the real estate market crashed and our depression hit some years ago, I was actually a director for a chamber of commerce up in the Bay Area in Northern California, and we did a sort of PR, more of a just a small business audit on
Yep.
all of the businesses that failed. Right,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't seem that many of them had bad services or bad products. It was that not enough people knew about them,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Just not enough people knew about them. Why is it that when budgets get low, the first thing to go is marketing and PR for most people? Like, what
Yep.
have we been conditioned to believe in regards to where we should be putting our money at in business? Why is that a thing when the truth of the matter is people cannot support you or patronize your business if they don't know who you are? Like, what is this
Yep.
psychology that has us thinking backwards like this?
Well, so it's interesting, right? And when I was talking about sort of the infrastructure for growth, right, it probably should be viewed as the infrastructure for growth and infrastructure for sustainment. And I probably could have said that a little bit better at the outset. But when you're looking at businesses, right, generally to me, infrastructure ends up being investments you make. Investments you make that you expect to help with sustainment or growth. to me, marketing, public relations, communications, those generally end up being viewed through that infrastructure lens, right? Because they are not normally what we associate with, let's say, classically, right, the sales activities that produce the revenue, or the delivery activities that allow us to recognize the revenue, or maybe the production activities that precede the delivery activities, where we produce, either widgets or written words, what have you. And to your point, investing in infrastructure is something that is very hard for people who are, top line growth and bottom line growth oriented, because infrastructure cuts into that bottom line profitability, right? And we have to get ourselves conditioned to say they're expenditures that are wise to make, because they ultimately will help me to sustain and grow my business. And to your point, right, the number of folks that I know who, Great Recession or, uncertainty of COVID, who were in what I'll characterize as infrastructure roles, that were very concerned about what was going to happen with their jobs, or especially during the Great Recession, rightly so, concerned about what where the next job was going to come from. It's because we tend to cut infrastructure, unfortunately, as our first line of defense, with making sure we can stay profitable. If we feel like the sales is starting to, straight line or even decline, we go straight to that infrastructure piece, rather than thinking, if I stay steady with some of my infrastructure costs, my profitability may come down for a while, but I can hopefully navigate the sales right back up. So to your point, it is that problem with making that infrastructure investment that I think often is what brings us to cutting infrastructure costs when we do face, headwinds.
What are 3 words that you would never want affiliated with you in your personal brand?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I can honestly say I've never had that question asked, so it will take me a second to ponder that. So I think anybody who knows me or works with me would probably say that, I tend to be fairly direct, for better or for worse. I tend to be fairly energetic, and tend to be very focused. So I think if I was looking for 3 words that would not be ones I would want, right, it would be, the opposite of direct, right, which is probably somebody who beats around the bush, right?
Indirect or
right? Indirect,
passive
yeah,
aggressive,
exactly. Someone who would be, low energy, right, or
lazy, complacent.
lazy, complacent. Exactly. You're much better at these negative words than I am. And then, the third area, right, which would be, I think when I look at the way that, yeah, you know what? Actually, lazy and complacent are probably the 2 words that I would pick. In addition to not very direct, because I think they're different meanings and they're both negative, right? So yeah, I tend to want to make sure that we look at the things that need to change, because let's face it, the world is changing, right? Constantly is. And if I look at the main difference between businesses I started in 2001, 2004 or 5 versus ones that I've, launched with partners more recently, the speed at which you need to execute, to me, has felt, maybe it's just because I'm older and I need more caffeine to keep up, but it feels to me like in any business, there is not as much time to navigate, right? You've got to be navigating and driving at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have any of your business partners ever been women?
They have. Yeah.
Talk to me about women in leadership right now.
Yeah. So I guess, and I may have a unique perspective, to your point in this universe. So, my first real job was working in a political campaign, and my boss, she was a terrific boss, and taught me sort of how to work in my first real work environment, right? I mean, I had jobs as a kid, like delivering papers and things like that, but a real work environment, right? Political campaign was my first, and it was a very, it was a diverse and fairly balanced workplace, right? So I benefited a lot from her wisdom on the way to kind of navigate um, my first work environment, right? And when it came time for the first startup, um, you know, the partners and I that launched it, we were doing reasonably well. We had made some adjustments, we'd made some pivots, we had taken on some venture investment. And what the venture investors did was they trusted our team to execute, since we'd navigated a couple of adjustments and a massive pivot and appeared to be on a good path. What they noticed, though, was that none of us had ever run a startup software company that was venture backed before. So they went out and tried to help us find someone who had that experience. And they ended up recruiting a person who was a venture investor at a fund that was on its second phase. They were not going to be raising a third fund. She had led sales at a company that was a software platform, and ultimately got acquired by a very large software company. So she knew the process, right? And what she did as far as providing the playbook and the continued guidance to get us into the appropriate sales model, which for us at that point was not direct, right? It needed to be channel driven. What she taught me about managing those channel relationships was invaluable. And then navigate to the next point where we're facing the economic headwinds of the Great Recession as we're ramping up this software business, which was basically an early Internet of Things platform. And had I been better at PR and marketing, Tanya, like you, I probably would have figured out I needed to call it that. But instead, we called it intelligent sensor middleware at the time. She helped to position us for the acquisition opportunity as large players started to come into that space that we were playing in. So, my first boss and really my best mentor, both women. And so the insights I got from them and the perspective that I bring, right, as far as seeking a diverse workplace, it's because I really came out of a model that was heavily influenced, right, by that. And when I look at, to your point, looking at management teams, right, and governance teams, that diversity is something that generally I look for and I encourage others to look for, because we all come with our experiences and the context that those experiences have produced for us to make decisions, right? Sometimes we make same mistakes we've made. Sometimes we make different decisions because of those mistakes. But at the end of the day, if you don't have diverse voices, right, both at a strategy level, at sort of a governance, within a governance team, or a tactical level, right, within a management team, odds are pretty good you're going to miss opportunities, and opportunities that could be the difference between success and failure.
Thank you for that. Internet's a little wonky right now, but I also wanted to ask you about diversity, not just man or woman, but diversity of voices in your organizations. Because you've done so much. How do you, since you spoke on it so well, how do you ensure that there is a continued level of diversity of not just backgrounds and thoughts, appearances? How do you continue to make sure that that's filtered in and it's still your best talent?
Yeah. Well, obviously, that is one of the things that a lot of organizations have launched, their DEI initiatives, which obviously they've got unique frameworks to support, especially in larger organizations, that, engagement, right, of new voices represented within the business. When you are smaller and when maybe not as from a geographic standpoint, right, you may or may not have access to a lot of folks in the area where you need to do sales and service work that do have diverse viewpoints. what I always try to do whenever we're looking at adding anyone to the team is say, what is it that we are missing,
Yeah.
right? And that could be, um, a set of experiences. It could be a perspective. It could be, any number of things that sort of fall into, this, diversity, sort of package that we're looking to deliver. Because, look, when you have a group of folks that work together who have similar experiences, similar beliefs, the odds are pretty good you're going to run that company into the ground, right?
Mhm.
Because it's very rare that you end up with new ideas coming from a group who all act the same, look the same, talk the same, right? And so, when you're very small and your opportunities to hire new team members may not be, you know, may not come around very often, right? If you're like a 5-person, 10-person company and you like your team, what I encourage people to do is then look for mentors, right? Or advisors or board members, right? Who bring that diverse viewpoint and diverse set of experiences into that strategic level, right? At the company, because if you can't add talent to your, you know, employee base, you can certainly add talent to your inside base.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, with everything that you've done and now with the book,
Right.
what do you want your legacy to be?
Great question. If, my children like to laugh when I tell them, hey, for instance, today I'm going to be on the Leaders and Learners podcast. They say, I can't believe people actually take advice from you, Dad, right? Now, and so, I like to tell them at some point they'll be glad that, some of the things I told them might be true. Who knows? They might tell their own children. But, I think, what I would love a legacy to be is that the Structure of Success book is something that folks who are leading small and medium sized businesses found some value in to help them sustain and grow their business. From a work perspective, that would be an amazing legacy. From a life perspective, right? I'm hoping that, my kids think that at some point I did something right. We'll see. Right. Jury's still out. And that, hopefully some of the advice I've given to friends and family ends up being beneficial.
I love that. Thank you for sharing and thank you for spending time with us today. Let the people know how they can get in touch with you if they need you, if they just want to continue to follow your journey and get their hands on your book.
Well, one, Tanya, thanks again for having me. Really appreciated the opportunity and the conversation. Obviously, I can be easily found on LinkedIn. Patrick Esposito. Also have a website, patrickesposito.com, and then the 2 business websites, acmegeneral.com, which supports the public sector innovation work that we do, and then initiativelabs.com, which supports companies in implementing the frameworks from the book, The Structure of Success, which you can buy online and through many of your local retailers.
I love that. Are you going to be doing any touring or are you getting out to California, Southern California soon?
Yeah, maybe right now I'll give you a maybe because one of my wife's she grew up in Oregon. One of her favorite places to visit, especially when cold weather hits, is sunny Southern California. So we may have to see you before too long as we go into that part of the year. So.
Well, if you do, definitely let us know anything that you are doing that we can help support. We will. Once you are a member of the Leaders and Learners family, we got your back. So keep us posted, stay connected. And again, thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks so much.
All right, guys, you heard it here. Okay. Take some time, get the book. It hasn't been out that long, but if you have a business, if you're thinking about going into business, if you are in the middle of business and you don't know which way to go, Patrick has a lot of knowledge. He has a lot of experience that he's sharing with you. And definitely want to make sure that you know this is a place that you can come to find information that's going to help you with your business and your personal life. So, much of what he talked about is definitely business based, but when you start thinking about diversity, like diversity of thought, am I keeping people around me, around my circle that continue to help me expand my mind? You do not want to be stuck. So, in life, you have to find ways to grow and expand. And I think a lot of what he's talking about in business can also help you personally. So if you get a chance, check out the book, stay connected, and make sure that you like and share this with someone else that you know might actually be struggling with their business, trying to figure out what to do next, and things of that nature. So, like, share, continue to follow and support the pod, and we will see you back here soon. Again, thanks for showing up. Thanks for, being here and continuing to support. I'll see you soon. Hey, thanks for showing up to the podcast where we all know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. When you get a sec, take a moment, leave a comment. What you think about today's episode, and share it with someone that you know could use the gems that were dropped today. Follow and subscribe. You don't want to miss who's coming up next. You never know who could show up here and what they could say. For your professional needs, marketing, PR, communications, and leadership, make sure you follow us on all social media platforms at Sand and Shores, or hit us up at sandandshores.com. Again, thanks so much for showing up. We appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.